In the high-stakes theater of biblical history, where empires rise on the edge of a sword and divine covenants are etched in blood, there exists a ghost in the narrative. A tribe that systematically dismantled its own destiny not through catastrophic rebellion, but through the silent erosion of comfort. We call him ASHER. In the intelligence circles of ancient Israel, ASHER was the strategic outlier, a name that literally translates to happy or blessed, yet one that echoes with the haunting resonance of a pagan deity. Born into the inner sanctum of Jacob's house, this tribe eventually became a geopolitical enigma, surrounded by the whispers of Assyrian idolatry and the seductive hum of Mediterranean trade. They were prosperous but passive, present in the promised land physically, yet mysteriously absent from every major strategic engagement that defined the nation's survival. As we analyze the ASHER paradox, we find a tribe that vanished from the scriptural spotlight for centuries, not by death nor by military defeat, but by a slow descent into irrelevance. It is a case study in what modern analysts might call cultural assimilation. And just when the intelligence brief on this tribe seems closed, they reappear in a shocking twist of prophetic continuity. Not in the chronicles of the Old Testament, nor in the desperate records of the Babylonian exile, but in the final, celestial roll call of the redeemed in the book of Revelation. How does a tribe that effectively disappears from the historical record reappear on God's final strategic list of the 144,000? Today, we strip away the Sunday school veneers and dig into the deep state secrets of the most paradoxical son Jacob ever sired. From ancient inscriptions unearthed in the dust of the Levant to the chilling warnings of end-time prophecy, ASHER's story is a tactical manual for the modern soul. It is a warning to those who fear being forgotten, and a promise for those who hope to be counted when the final seals are broken. The origin of this mystery begins in a tent filled with psychological warfare. The Bible paints the birth of ASHER as a moment of triumph, but the geopolitical subtext is far more complex. Leah, caught in an escalating arms race of fertility against her sister Rachel, declared upon his birth, "Happy am I, for the daughters will call me blessed." Thus she named him ASHER. But we must pause and look at the structural integrity of this family. This was not Leah's biological child. This was the son of Zilpah, her maid, a surrogate caught in the emotional crossfire of a household wrestling for the validation of one man. Out of this tangled web of rivalry and silent tears came a name that means fortunate one. In Hebrew, ASHER is a label of prosperity, but was this child truly blessed, or was happiness merely a branding exercise used to mask deep-seated familial trauma? Names in the ancient Near East were not merely phonetic identifiers, they were prophetic blueprints and destiny markers. However, the name ASHER carries a dual-layered threat. While it signaled joy to the Hebrews, it carried a troubling echo to the intelligence networks of the surrounding nations. Just across the northern border, in the heart of what would become the brutal Assyrian Empire, stood a supreme national deity named ASHER. The similarity is not merely linguistic, it is haunting. Two names nearly identical in cadence, but worlds apart in allegiance. One a son of the covenant, the other the god of imperial conquest. This raises a terrifying question for historical analysts. Did Jacob, perhaps influenced by the Mesopotamian cultures of his youth, inadvertently stamp his son with a title that mirrored the very idol that would eventually liquidate the northern kingdom? Some scholars argue that the linguistic crossover is a mere coincidence, a quirk of Semitic roots. But a more analytical view suggests prophetic contamination. It serves as proof that even within the patriarchal tents, pagan echoes were already beginning to vibrate. If the name itself was a prophetic hint, a warning label on a tribe whose future would be defined by compromise and cultural blending, then ASHER's destiny was compromised from the very first breath. The seed of conflict was buried deep inside a smile. To understand ASHER's strange trajectory, we must look at the spiritual and economic soil in which he was planted. Jacob did not raise his sons in a purified, sterile environment. He raised them in Haran, a geopolitical hub soaked in ancient Mesopotamian religion, where idols were as common as household furniture. This is the uncomfortable thesis we must confront. ASHER was not just a tribe that was blessed, it was a tribe that was blurred. They existed in a spiritual gray zone, where the boundaries between the holy and the profane were systematically softened by prosperity. This blurred identity would eventually pull ASHER off the battlefield of history and erase him from Israel's center stage. The tribe's disappearance was so quiet, so polite, that most believers never even noticed it happened. But just as the mystery seemed contained within the biblical text, modern archaeology threw a strategic grenade into the timeline. In the 13th century BC, Egyptian records from the reign of Seti I and Ramesses II began to mention a group known as the Aseru or the ASHER people, inhabiting the highlands of western Galilee. Here is the intelligence anomaly. If the traditional dating of the Exodus is correct, and Israel was still groaning under the lash of Pharaoh's taskmasters in the Nile Delta, what were the ASHER people doing already settled, prosperous, and recognized by Egyptian intelligence in the north of Canaan? This discovery has forced a radical reevaluation of the conquest. It suggests a terrifying possibility, that ASHER may have detached from the main body of Israel early, infiltrating the promised land not through the fire of Joshua's campaigns, but through quiet diplomatic integration. A tribe that slips into its inheritance without a fight is a tribe that never learns the military discipline of the soul. If ASHER bypassed the wilderness of Sinai, they also bypassed the miracles that forged Israel's identity. They missed the parting of the sea, they missed the bread from heaven, they missed the terrifying intimacy of the law given in fire. Instead, they settled peacefully among the Canaanites, blending like salt dissolved in water, still present but invisible to the naked eye. This shortcut to success may have cost them their spiritual spine. It is a chilling reminder for the modern era. The absence of hardship does not equate to the presence of God's favor. Often, the loudest miracles are reserved for the hardest places, and a life of unearned comfort is merely a slow-motion disappearance. If the archaeological data is correct, and ASHER had indeed established a foothold in the Levant, while the rest of the tribes were still navigating the geopolitical meat grinder of the Egyptian Exodus, then our traditional understanding of the biblical map must undergo a radical restructuring. We are looking at a potential dual-track migration. While the main body of Israel was being forged in the furnace of Sinai, learning the discipline of the law and the high-stakes survival of the desert, ASHER may have been operating as a silent, detached vanguard. They were the pioneer tribe that traded the wonders of the wilderness for the stability of the coast. But as any strategic analyst will tell you, a shortcut in the short term often leads to a catastrophic deficit in the long term. Tribes forged in the desert learn radical dependence on the divine. Tribes birthed in the shadows of the status quo learn only how to blend in. This early settlement pattern created a spiritual amnesia that would haunt ASHER's legacy. By the time the consolidated forces of Israel under Joshua finally crossed the Jordan to claim their destiny, ASHER was already entrenched in a geography of immense wealth. They were allotted the western Galilee, a region extending from the base of Mount Carmel up to the formidable ports of Tyre and Sidon. This wasn't just land, it was a prime economic corridor. In the world of ancient trade, this was the Silicon Valley of the Levant. The soil was so rich that Jacob's final blessing to ASHER in Genesis 49:20 prophesied that his food shall be rich, and he shall yield royal delicacies. ASHER sat on the world's most lucrative olive oil refineries. They had the Mediterranean trade routes at their doorstep, and direct access to the Phoenician merchant empires. However, wealth in the ancient world, much like today, is a double-edged sword that cuts through national identity. As the other tribes were sharpening their swords and mobilizing for the existential threat of the Canaanite kings, ASHER was checking their ledgers. The first major crack in their national loyalty appeared during the era of the Judges. In Judges 5, a high-intensity conflict broke out between the coalition of Israelite tribes and the formidable Canaanite general Sisera. This was a total war scenario. Deborah, the prophetess and commander, issued a call to arms that reached every corner of the nation. But when the dust settled on the battlefield of Megiddo, the record of ASHER's participation was a stinging rebuke. ASHER continued on the seashore and stayed in his coves. While the men of Zebulun and Naphtali were risking their lives on the high places of the field, the intelligence report on ASHER was clear. They were neutral. But in a covenantal war, neutrality is an act of desertion. Why did they stay by the water? Because the coastline of ASHER was a place of success, not suffering. They had agricultural abundance that dripped with oil. They had business partnerships with the wealthy Phoenician merchants, the masters of the sea who controlled the global supply of purple dye and cedar wood. To go to war was to disrupt the supply chain. To stand with Israel was to risk the trade agreements that made them the most comfortable tribe in the north. ASHER had fallen into the trap of economic exceptionalism. They believed their prosperity was more valuable than their calling. This is the diagnosis heaven recorded over them. Comfort had become their idol. They were not wicked in the way the pagans were. They weren't openly sacrificing to Moloch in the city squares yet. they were simply soft. And in the theater of spiritual warfare, softness is often more lethal than sin. Comfort, when embraced over a divine mandate, doesn't just weaken a movement, it erases its impact, slowly, silently, and almost politely. ASHER teaches us that the enemy doesn't always need to defeat you in a head-on collision, if he can simply distract you with the good life. To understand the force that silenced ASHER's voice, we must look closer at their neighbors, the Phoenicians. These were not mere trading partners, they were cultural conquerors. The Phoenicians were the sophisticated globalists of the 12th century BC. Behind their maritime expertise and artistic refinement stood the dark thrones of Baal, the storm god of power, and Ashtoreth, the goddess of war and fertility. Their influence didn't spread through invasion but through soft power, through commerce, intermarriage, and lifestyle. ASHER, prospering on the periphery, began to invite this influence in. It started with trade, transitioned into friendship, and ended with a slow, voluntary absorption. The tribe began to look less like the covenant people and more like the Phoenician merchant class, until eventually ASHER disappeared from the scriptural narrative entirely. There are no more recorded judges from ASHER. No warriors. No epic songs of victory. Just a strategic silence. In the pages of the Bible, that silence is the ultimate judgment. It signifies that a tribe has moved from being a player in God's grand narrative to being a spectator of their own decline. They were wealthy, they were smiling, and they were spiritually hollow. They had fallen into a state of lukewarmness that made them strategically useless for the next phase of Israel's history. As the geopolitical storm clouds of the Assyrian Empire began to gather on the horizon, ASHER stood as a tribe with no spiritual spine, a people who had traded their birthright for a seat at the table of international trade. As the narrative of Israel shifts from the localized skirmishes of the judges to the centralized power of the monarchy, the intelligence profile on ASHER reveals a disturbing trend of total strategic withdrawal. While the other tribes were producing the architects of the kingdom, Judah providing the scepter and Benjamin the first king, ASHER remained a ghost in the machinery of statecraft. Look through the biblical archives. No major judges emerged from ASHER to rescue the nation. No renowned kings rose from his lineage to expand the borders. There are no passionate psalms composed by ASHERite musicians, and no bold prophets identified with their territory. His name appears on the geographic maps of the Levant, but it is conspicuously absent from the great movements of the Spirit. This is a terrifying case of spiritual invisibility. In the realm of geopolitical analysis, this is known as a failed state of the soul. ASHER did not get removed from the record because they were overtly evil. They were sidelined because they were lukewarm. They were too blessed to be desperate, too comfortable to be courageous, and too blended into the surrounding Phoenician culture to be distinct. This serves as a radical diagnostic for the modern era. The greatest punishment is not always a sudden strike of judgment, but a slow descent into irrelevance. While other tribes went to war and were immortalized in the Hall of Heroes, ASHER stayed on the sidelines of the status quo and slid right off the page of history. By the time the United Kingdom split into two, the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah, ASHER was firmly embedded in the north. But as the northern kingdom descended into a spiral of systemic idolatry, ASHER's proximity to the Phoenician religious hub of Tyre and Sidon became a fatal liability. The blurred identity we analyzed earlier finally reached its breaking point. The prophets from Elijah to Amos began to issue high-level warnings about the coming storm from the east, the Neo-Assyrian Empire. This was the first truly totalitarian superpower, a military machine that utilized psychological warfare and mass deportation as its primary tools of statecraft. In 722 BC, the storm finally hit. The Assyrian king Sargon II breached the walls of Samaria, and the northern kingdom collapsed. The Assyrian policy was brutal. They didn't just conquer a land, they erased a people. They uprooted the indigenous population and scattered them across the far-flung corners of their empire, modern-day Iraq, Iran, and beyond. This catastrophic event birthed the tragic phrase that still echoes through history, the 10 lost tribes. ASHER was among the first to be swept away. The irony of their end is a haunting masterclass in prophetic symmetry. A tribe whose name, ASHER, sounded like the national god of their conquerors, ASHER, was ultimately consumed by the very empire that bore that name. The question that haunts historians is whether ASHER was exiled or if he had already been forgotten. It is highly probable that the tribe had disappeared spiritually long before the first Assyrian soldier crossed the border. They had been eroded by centuries of voluntary compromise, Their covenantal identity dissolved into the prosperous Mediterranean lifestyle. When the invasion came, there was no spiritual spine left to resist. They didn't fall in a day, they had been fading for generations. As they were marched into the mists of history, the record of ASHER seemed to close forever. They were scattered, nameless, and culturally liquidated. However, the divine narrative operates on a different frequency than human history. To the world, the 10 tribes were lost, an intelligence failure of cosmic proportions. But in the archives of heaven, a remnant protocol was already in place. Even as the tribe vanished from the political map, God began to preserve a specific lineage that refused to be assimilated. This brings us to a critical realization for anyone living in a lukewarm culture today. The devil does not need to attack your life if he can simply distract you with your own success. Your business can drown your boldness, your comfort can kill your calling. You can be on the church registry, but entirely off God's tactical radar. As we pivot from the ashes of the Assyrian exile to the heart of the modern believer, we see ASHER as a mirror. We see a generation of people who are blessed, respected, and well-fed, yet strategically silent. We attend our rituals but avoid the high-stakes battles of our era. We are present in the promised land of our modern freedoms, but we have no footprint in the mission of God. But just as ASHER's story seemed destined for the trash heap of history, the script undergoes a shocking, high-level restoration. God was about to prove that his memory is longer than our failures, and that he can find a needle of faith in a haystack of compromise. In the cold, analytical reality of human history, a name erased is a name forgotten. For 7 centuries, the intelligence file on the tribe of ASHER remained dormant, buried under the debris of the Assyrian diaspora and the shifting sands of the Hellenistic era. To the world, they were the lost ones, a cautionary tale of a people who traded their spiritual birthright for the temporary comfort of the coastline and were subsequently liquidated by the tides of time. But in the grand strategy of the divine, there is no such thing as a closed case. Just when the mystery of ASHER seemed destined for the dustbin of antiquity, God staged a high-level reintroduction in the most unexpected setting. Not on a battlefield but in a temple, not through a warrior but through an elderly widow. In the 2nd chapter of the Gospel of Luke, during the presentation of the infant Jesus in Jerusalem, the narrative suddenly focuses on a figure who disrupts 700 years of silence. There was also a prophet, Anna, the daughter of Phanuel, of the tribe of ASHER. This is a shock to the system. After the total collapse of the northern kingdom and the supposed erasure of the 10 tribes, here stands a woman whose identity is explicitly linked to the forgotten tribe. While the religious elites of the day, the priests and the scholars, were blinded by their own bureaucratic rituals, it was this daughter of ASHER who possessed the spiritual intelligence to recognize the Messiah. Anna serves as the ultimate sleeper cell of faith. She represents the redemptive potential of a remnant. Where her ancestors had chased the coastal prophets of Tyre and Sidon, she embraced the poverty of consecration. Where the men of ASHER had stayed in their coves to avoid the battle, she stayed in the temple, worshiping night and day, fasting and praying. She was 84 years old, having lived as a widow for most of her life, yet her fire had not dimmed. In a tribal lineage marked by lukewarmness and compromise, Anna was a white-hot flame of devotion. She is the proof that God never forgets what man has written off as lost. When human history erases a name, the archives of heaven keep it written in fire. The presence of Anna at the birth of Christ is a masterclass in prophetic beauty. She embodies everything the tribe of ASHER had failed to become. Her life was a silent rebuke to the comfort-first theology of her ancestors. She didn't seek a platform or a trade route, she sought the presence. And because she sought the presence, God gave her a platform that all the wealth of the Phoenicians could never buy. She became one of the first official witnesses to proclaim the redemption of Jerusalem to the world. Through Anna, the tribe of ASHER was not just remembered, it was redeemed. She was the mustard seed of revival hidden inside a lineage that the world thought was spiritually dead. This tactical reversal is a powerful signal to the modern ASHER generation. It suggests that no matter how deep the compromise of your lineage, or how silent your spiritual history has been, God can restart the legacy through a single heart that refuses to stay lukewarm. The contrast is stark. The tribe's shame was their spiritual inactivity and coastal comfort, leading to a forgotten legacy. Anna's glory was her relentless devotion and prophetic honor, leading to an eternal legacy. She proves that even if an entire tribe or family line goes missing from God's purpose, a single individual's yes can pull that name back into the center of the divine plan. But the restoration of ASHER goes even deeper than a single prophetess in a temple. As we move from the first advent to the apocalyptic horizon of the book of Revelation, we find the final, high-level briefing on the tribes of Israel. In Revelation chapter 7, the heavens open for a sacred roll call, the sealing of the 144,000 who will stand in the midst of the great end-time shaking. This is the ultimate who's who of God's strategic remnant. As the list is read, there is a shocking omission. The tribe of Dan, synonymous with rebellion and idolatry, is gone. But in its place, standing firm among the sealed, is the name we once thought was lost forever, ASHER. Why would the tribe that chose comfort over calling, that faded into the Assyrian mists, and that was culturally diluted by pagans, be included in the final, elite honor guard of the end times? The answer is not found in ASHER's performance, but in God's sovereign grace. The inclusion of ASHER in the 144,000 is a scandal of mercy. It suggests that while bold, unrepentant rebellion, like that of Dan, can lead to removal, the quiet repentance exemplified by remnants like Anna can lead to a total restoration of a bloodline's purpose. ASHER becomes a walking prophecy, a symbol of the fact that heaven does not choose based on the applause of human history, but according to a redemptive agenda that can find the lost, even at the very end of the world. As we reach the final dossier on the tribe of ASHER, we move from the dust of archaeology and the silence of the temple into the high-stakes theater of the apocalypse. The inclusion of ASHER in the final roll call of Revelation 7 is more than just a list of names. It is a strategic declaration. In the intelligence of heaven, a name is never truly lost if the king still holds the seal. The 12,000 from the tribe of ASHER who stand among the 144,000 are the ultimate special operations unit of redemption. They are the living proof that God can reach into the most culturally diluted, spiritually eroded, and historically forgotten lineages to find a remnant. This is the scandal of divine grace. It doesn't just salvage what is broken, it recovers what was discarded. The mystery of why ASHER remains while a tribe like Dan is omitted speaks to the core of spiritual survival. In a geopolitical sense, Dan represented active, structured rebellion, the establishment of alternative altars. ASHER, conversely, represented the danger of the lukewarm state. Their restoration suggests that for those who have drifted into the coastline of comfort, there is a pathway back through the Anna protocol, the choice of one individual to stay burning when the rest of the lineage has gone cold. ASHER becomes a symbol of the restored remnant, a warning that while you can miss your historical moment through compromise, you don't have to miss your eternal destiny if you return to the fire. This brings the analysis directly into the present day. The story of ASHER is not a history lesson. It is a real-time warning for the 21st century believer. We are currently living in the ASHER era, a time of unprecedented prosperity, technological comfort, and coastal success. Like ASHER, many of us are on the map but off the move. We have the royal delicacies of modern life, the oil and the trade routes of the digital age, yet we are mysteriously absent from the spiritual battlefields where the soul of our generation is being contested. We have built coves of convenience that have become our spiritual prisons. The hard truth of this documentary is that the lost tribes didn't start getting lost when the Assyrians arrived. They got lost when they stopped caring about the covenant. If you are a believer with a stable job, a comfortable home, and a silent spiritual life, you are walking the same shoreline that ASHER once trod. Your business can become your ball, your comfort can become your captivity. The tragedy of ASHER is the tragedy of being bypassed, not because God is cruel, but because the tribe made itself strategically irrelevant through its own satisfaction. But as we close this briefing, the call from the Spirit is one of radical invitation. Today, God is calling you back from the coastline of comfort. He is calling you back from a casual Christianity that has no scars and no stories. He is looking for the Annas of this generation, those who are willing to trade the delicacies of the world for the devotion of the temple. This is your moment of tactical repositioning. Whether you have been spiritually missing for a year or a decade, the seal is still available. The God who found ASHER in the scattered ruins of the Assyrian Empire can find you in the distractions of the modern world. The question is no longer about a tribe from 3,000 years ago. The question is, will you be counted in the final remnant? Will your name be among those who stayed in the coves, or those who stood on the mount with the Lamb? The coastline is beautiful, but the battle is where the crown is won. Don't let your prosperity be your obituary. Rise from the shoreline, leave the comforts of the coastal life, and reclaim your place in the grand narrative of God. The king is calling the roll, and he is waiting to see if you will respond.